All right, welcome everyone. We're going to get started here in just a second. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. I think people are probably still trickling in, but we want to be cognizant of your time and stay on schedule. So first off, thank you everyone for being here today and welcome to Genome Startup Day 2020. My name is Kayla Young and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Phase Genomics. We have an exciting event planned for you today and are thrilled to welcome so many attendees from across the United States as well as from across the world for this second annual event. Genome Startup Day was launched about a year ago with a mission to support the next generation of genomics entrepreneurs. It's a big task. The broad field of genomics is fueling an unprecedented acceleration in wide-ranging scientific discovery, unlike nearly any other discipline in history. From biotechs and pharmaceutical companies to global NGOs, hospital systems, and research institutions, there's never been as much interest in genomics to help deliver solutions for today's most urgent issues. In fact, the global genomics market has an estimated value of more than $17 billion and is quickly growing. Yet, despite this exciting and promising future for genomics, academic scientists looking to make the leap into entrepreneurship often find there's no clear roadmap to foster that transition. Genome Startup Day aims to change that through events and programs such as this that provide support and mentorship for postdocs and graduate students who are interested in pursuing a genomics career beyond academia, but aren't really sure where to begin. Genome Startup Day is also a community building catalyst for genomics startup founders, investors, service providers, media, and job seekers. We're thrilled to have many of you with us today. In a moment, we're going to begin our first presentation, but first a few important items. And let me just pull up my slide. Oops. All right. So today's event is possible thanks to the generous support of our sponsors. We're grateful to these leaders seen on the screen who are creating a vibrant and thriving future for genomics commercialization. Additionally, I'd also like to thank S2S Public Relations who are instrumental in making today's event happen. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. We will be doing 2 different giveaways through the course of this event. You do have to be present in order to win. Additionally, please join the conversation on Twitter using hashtag Genome Startup. And finally, we'll be doing question and answer portions of each panel. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen in order to ask your questions. Okay, so with the housekeeping kind of under wraps, let's get started. First up, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Ben Swetzinger from the Australian National University in Canberra and Dr. Ivan Liachko, founder and CEO of Phase Genomics in Seattle. Ben, Ivan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kylie.
Thanks, Kayla.
Sorry, Kayla.
All right, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Ivan. I'm one of the founders of Phase Genomics and organizers of Genome Startup Day. As you can see from my funky outfit, we're going to have a fireside chat, which is something new that we're trying this year. And let me tell you why. So, as you all know, genomics is super important and it affects all sorts of facets of human life, from cancer and precision medicine to infectious disease and agriculture. The implications are huge. And you know, a huge portion of this is invented in academia. But the problem is a huge portion of this technology doesn't make it out of academia. And that's one of the reasons why we really wanted to start Genome Startup Day, is to help people at that very early stage, folks who are maybe just starting out, or maybe they're still academics and they're thinking about spinning something out, they're kind of on the cusp. And so what we wanted to do this year is something a little bit different, which is to try to talk to someone who is actually on the academic side, and so kind of describing sort of like an embryonic sort of stage of technology that was first developed in academia, and you know, we're thinking about sort of maybe this is worth commercializing. To kind of, give you a little bit of feedback on what these things look like before they're like full-blown startups. And so today I'm joined by Dr. Benjamin Swetzinger from Australian National University in Canberra. His group collaborated with us on a few projects, mostly having to do with genomics of pathogenic fungi. And in a process of working together, they together uncovered something that we kind of didn't expect. And then it turned out that it was a bigger problem than we thought. And we sort of started looking at it from a more commercial angle. And so this is sort of a good example of a situation that resembles a lot of the kind of startup origin stories that come out of academia. And so I wanted to bring Ben for a quick fireside chat. So Benjamin, thank you so much for coming. Welcome to Genome Startup Day. Just to get started, can you do a little bit of a background? Just tell us a little bit about what this project is that I was talking about and sort of why it turned out so important. And I'll sit here and I will smoke my fireside chat fake pipe.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you for kind invitation and introduction. Yes, so what we are working on is these pathogenic fungi, which infect like wheat. So if you had your bread this morning or, don't know, afternoon tea, so you probably ate some wheat. And so this fungi, they compete with you for the energy source. And what's kind of so special about these fungi and why we really got into the high C data with phase was they have two different nuclei. So they have one, they're T-karyotic, so they have two nuclei. And so what's really important actually to study those is actually to have the genome of each individual nucleus fully assembled and analyzed. The significance of these fungi is really that until the 1940s, for example, they in recurrent cycle devastated crops for example, in the US, it's also called the Black Death. And actually Norman Borlaug got a Nobel Prize in peace for actually partly to actually make wheat resistance to this. So there have been a big problem, most recently in the early 2000s, UT99 is one of these strains which came about and wiped out all these resistances in wheat. And so the world was like, oh my God, how are we going to feed everybody? And so that's where it came in, and that's also the strain we looked at and worked on. So the problem always was that technology couldn't really handle these genomes because they have these two nuclei, they're really heterozygous. You couldn't really say which piece of DNA belongs to which nucleus. So when we started working on this, we kind of pioneered this first with long reads, but the long reads like either BacBio or nanopore, they didn't give us the full picture we wanted because you couldn't really face it completely. You couldn't say which part of DNA is in which nucleus. So when Ivan and Phase Genomics launched these kits, I think it must be 3 years ago, I think, we were just like, oh yeah, that's a great kit, let's try this, because we wanted to apply these technologies, but we also knew that actually doing this in-house is really, really difficult because these protocols, it took like 2 weeks. And if you ever work with fungi, you know that they're like full of crap, really, which inhibits all the enzymes. So we were like, okay, let's try this new kit, which had just arrived to market. And we were lucky that it worked, or maybe it was just a really great product at the time. It definitely got better on the way too. And so what this enabled us to show is actually how these fungi evolve. So they can evolve by swapping nuclei in and out between, and those, this gives a new like virulence profile, new ways to infect the plants. And this gave rise to these hypervirulent strains, which gave such an outcry in agriculture early 2000s. And so we could show that they swap nucleus, and so it was really exciting for everybody in the field because it was kind of conundrum how actually these pathogens evolve. And so when we published the paper at the end, we have first did a preprint, and then of course always publishing in a fancy journal helps grabbing some more attention. I think other people got really excited about it, and we got contacted by people on Twitter and by emails and stuff like this. With our collaborator who led this at Cyro 2, and I think that was pretty exciting, and we have more and more projects actually working with others too, because we also developed with Jana Schwerschneider some of the bioinformatic tools specifically for these fungi. So yeah, that was pretty exciting for us.
Yeah, so then I guess the story goes, you guys published this, and we ended up getting sort of so much interest once it came out, because it seemed like such a simple thing. You know, we sort of wrote off fungi. You know, we do a lot of work with like plants and animals, cancer and all that stuff, big genomes. We kind of wrote off fungi, and I didn't really have an agricultural background. But then when we saw that like this weird biology that these guys have, this like swapping of the nuclei, and it creates these like world shattering problems where it will take out, you know, like half of like a crop of a small country or something. And you know, we started learning more and more about this technology. We realized that this problem is widespread, has been heavily invested in. Like, I think Gates Foundation has invested like $50 million or something into just that one pathogen. And there's many others. Like there's like this oat crown rust that in like 5 years ago killed half the oats in Minnesota or something. And it's like this huge problem. And, but it's very difficult to understand this biology. And our tech was kind of unique in that it could do it. And so we sort of, for us, like I was talking to you about this earlier, like it was a little bit of like how we founded Phase. So when we founded Phase, the whole point was that there was this big problem that we learned about in the space, and we had this technology that could solve it pretty easily. It was something that was very difficult to do, and we had an idea we could solve this. And so we started by publishing through normal academic channels, and then started pushing it forward. And now we're, you know, you and I and others, we're writing all these grants, and we're talking to commercial partners, because we think actually the simple application of this tech can be very impactful in you know, just the world in general. And so, Ben, how has working on this sort of changed or shaped your view on commercialization, on startups, just, you know, sort of the stuff that we're talking about here? Because you're not directly involved in startups per se, you just work with us.
Yeah, so just to point out, yeah, so there have been actually really huge investment into this area before. I think I just recently wrote something up, and they actually nearly $300 million were invested in this area, like for different aspects, actually trying to hold this passage on the bay over the last couple of years. So yeah, it is a huge problem in agriculture. So yeah, so what did I learn? So I think, you, as an academic, I think I was always interested actually to generate tools. And so part of what startups is, I think, is about is actually generating tools for other people to use. So I learned actually also like a little bit about product development. So we tested some of these kits. And so that was an interesting thing to do. Of course, you learn about entrepreneurship a little bit. So actually maybe how to sell your science in a different, actually try to sell your science actually for money. And actually it also generates maybe a better understanding of your worth. I think for us at least, I think since we worked with Ivan, I think we got contacted by different startups, and we have been also working with Genomics like a tiny bit, and with others too. So I think it's just also extends your network. So that's something what you learn. Of course, if you early adopters of some of these technologies, it gives you also like a scientific edge. And it also provides you just a different like view of the world, because if you have this a little bit like, oh, what is a product I could develop, or what is really a bottleneck? I think this whole entrepreneurship got me more looking at bottleneck. So like, what is a bottleneck in research? Like, how do you actually get from A to B? Like, and I think a lot about, it's about tools, and then also just interacting with startups and how they maybe try to get money. I think, of course, the new granting opportunities. So I think since we started to work with Phase, we also worked with some local companies, and then you have a new pot of money which you can actually access, and maybe also the problems you work on maybe more immediate. So something maybe where you have a more quick output. And then I think at the end, I think I also just feel more secure personally, because I know I could probably just take the leap and do something myself. Having like these networks and maybe spin off like an idea or join a startup somewhere, I think it's not like such a scary thing anymore. And I think that makes you more adventurous also in your science. So I think these are kind of like the edge-on effects.
Yeah, cool. I mean, lowering inhibitions is definitely something that we work on in terms of kind of giving people confidence, because I think a lot, you know, I'm in Seattle, which has this interesting kind of image problem where it's a super high-tech town, but also there's not a huge biotech spin out community, and that's part of why we started it here, because there's certainly the raw talent here, but people are a little bit worried about it, and I think just presenting it and doing these kind of projects can really help sort of lower those barriers. Ben, besides kind of like this project and sort of working with us and commercializing stuff, since you interact with so many technologically savvy startups and companies, what would be some advice that you could give to early stage spin-outs, startups, etc.? Like, how should they interact with you? Because like Phase, we work a lot, we sell a lot to academics. What would be some salient points of advice that you could give to young startups that are interacting with folks like yourselves?
I think there's two kinds of startups like what I have interacted on. So one is like you guys and also many others which actually try to sell products to scientists. So this is one way, and I think, and maybe I give a little bit of advice or like how I see this a little bit. First of all, I think your product needs to actually address the bottleneck. So it needs to be useful, and I think it also needs to give you an edge. Like it needs to give you something more, because if you just dump it in from a big company, you probably just buy the big company because there's no interest actually trying something new. But if you want to try something new, yeah, it needs to give the edge. It needs to be like quick, and it should at least work somehow initially. Like I personally, I don't have a problem if the product isn't like perfect initially, because I know that's the risk I take. At the same time, of course, we here in Australia, we don't have like a high stack of cash somewhere hidden away or so. I think the funding structure is not that we run big labs, but it's more smaller. So I think working with these smaller labs, I think can be beneficial. But at the same time, I think you need to give something. So I think either some insight or maybe a discount, or if something doesn't work, maybe like send something again. Or I think that's for us, it's very important, because simply otherwise we can't afford that. Like we can't afford that. And of course, be nice, like actually be nice, maybe reach out. And I think I really appreciate, for example, that Faith invites me to these events because I find it interesting. It extends your networks and so on, and you learn something. Maybe don't be too salesy, like especially if you start up, like really try to build relationships. And I think that is probably what defines the success of many startups too. And then, yeah, build like long-term relationships. So we, for example, with Face, again, we have this long-term relationship. We also do a little bit of like product testing. So that's good. And then that's kind of the first set of startups, which I think which try to sell your product. But I think there are, of course, also startups which reach out to you for actually your expertise, because you can't have all the expertise initially in-house. So that's the second kind of startup. We work with Soil Carbon, which is a local startup, which, for example, would want some expertise in the genome assembly space. And then I think you just have to pay for it. I think you can't expect that scientists just give their time away for free all the time. And you need to have a good reward structure out of this. So that's for the second batch, I think. Yeah. So, but I find it like super exciting working with new and upcoming people and technologies, and because it gives you edge in your research, and at the same time it makes it just more diverse and more exciting.
Cool. So yeah, so one of the things, like to kind of double up on what you're saying, one of the things that we at Phase learned early on, when we started, because we're all scientists, and so we're starting a science company. And we really thought like, okay, it's about your product. Your product is like, if it's good, it'll sell. If it's not good, it won't sell. We kind of didn't want to like muddy ourselves with like business stuff. But what we learned along the way is that it is a business, and it's the same human aspects of like, these are people on the other side, and investing in relationships with people is shockingly important. Like you'd think like, if two people are selling the same thing and one is a little bit better at the technical stuff, then everybody's going to buy that. But no, like what we found, and maybe I don't know if you've had such experiences too, or that like people will choose based on who they have a better relationship with. And these relationships in the long run, when you're starting out, you don't necessarily see the future, all of it. But once you've been in it for a few years, you look back, you're like, wow, those relationships we sowed early on really have paid off. I don't know. Do you have any kind of insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, if I try to touch on it a little bit, but if you try, of course, to have a new product, but your product still competes on a market with like older products. And so it's really hard to change people like what they do if you just have to be a little bit better. And often your initial product also has a facelift. It was great, but I think it's way better now. So, but we were pretty forgiving because we knew the people behind it, we believed in their ideas. So, and we could also develop something together. So I think that is really, really important, because otherwise we probably would have just dropped it. Because I think, yeah, learning an old dog a new trick, I think it's always difficult. And maybe if you have some goodies in your bag and give it to them every now and again, then maybe just stay with you instead of running off again to the big herd. So I think it's pretty important.
Humans are still humans. Yep. Okay, so let me, time is starting to roll up. So let me ask, maybe I have time for a question. There's a couple of questions that are posted in Q&A. How do I get a jacket like this? Well, it's been created by a local Seattle company called Amazon.com, and you too can purchase it from it, I'm sure. Maybe this is a good question for you, Ben. From an Australian perspective, what are the challenges of starting a startup? Have you seen any specific barriers?
So because I actually haven't started a startup, but I can put a couple of pointers. So there have been a couple of incubators, especially in agriculture. So there's one in Sydney, which is called Encarter, which I think has this residence program where you can apply and they like give you some money and take some competitions around it. And I think that's a good way to start, because they also have a hub. And though also here at the ACT, in Canberra, we also have the CED, which is I can't pronounce this acronym, so I just skip it. But it's also like for agriculture, where you try to generate a hub and provide people like with resources to reach out. So, and I know also there are more of them in regional areas. So I think it's really a thing which the government also tries to promote to get started. So I would get in touch with one of the centers, because they have a lot of resources to get started. And I think people actually always think there is not a lot of money in Australia for startups, but I think there actually is. So for example, the recent startup Soil Carbon we work with, I know they raised quite a lot of money within Australia too. So I think there is actually quite a lot of opportunity, and also also from government funding. So
yeah. So seek out those sorts of opportunities. Cool. So let's all thank Benjamin for his thoughts. Everybody give him an inaudible.
I think we're in the socks stage, aren't we?
Yeah, we're at that stage. I'm deafened by the sound of applause through the internet. That happened. So yeah, so I'm sure you guys love sitting through long Zoom meetings. And so what we've done, we're going to give you some rewards for doing that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to give away one of these, a pair of fancy DNA socks, one of which, well, Ben's got one of each. So Kayla is going to draw a totally random name, and she's going to tell me who that is. And I'm checking right now. Let's see. Renee Miller, are you in the audience? Can you like raise your hand or say something on chat? Yes. All right, Renee, you have been confirmed as a winner. So you're going to get one of these. You can choose which one. Just we'll talk to you afterwards.
Yeah, Renee, I'll coordinate with you.
Yep. Cool. And so that is my part of this. I'm going to go smoke my Frenchy fake pipe. And I'll see you guys later when I'm going to be giving away more stuff. Bye.
Great. Thank you, Evan. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so we're just going to keep on rolling into our next panel. And so I would like to introduce Juliana, who will be moderating this panel. She is from Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology News, and will get us going on the next one. So Kelvin and Trey and Brian, if you guys could all join us, and we will get kicked off. And I'll also note there were some other good questions that didn't get addressed in that first panel that I actually think will probably be more applicable to this panel. So I will shoot them over to Juliana for that portion. So I see your questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Kayla and Ivan. And hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our discussion today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today with this incredible panel representing some truly exciting and innovative genomic startups. Today, I'm going to be asking our panelists how they got started in building their companies, what they've learned along the way, and their perspectives on what the future holds for the biotech industry. To start, I'm going to ask each panelist to tell us a little bit about themselves and their companies, starting with Trey from Watchmaker Genomics.
Hi, thanks, Juliana. Hello, everyone. My name is Trey Foskett, and I'm one of the co-founders and CEO at Watchmaker Genomics. Prior to founding Watchmaker, I was Vice President of Sequencing and Life Science at Roche. And then prior to my time at Roche, I was a co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at a company called Kappa Biosystems. And my background is in life science tools and specific focus on next-gen sequencing.
Okay, Brian, how about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Juliana. I'm another co-founder of Watchmaker Genomics with Trey. Before this, I was leading research and development at another Boulder-based cancer diagnostics company called ArcherDX. I have a background sort of in cancer biology, genomics, and computational biology. And yeah, I've been here in the Boulder area for about 10 years after relocating from graduate school in Seattle.
Okay, great. And Adina.
I am the CEO of Spiral Genetics. I've been running Spiral now for 10 years, and I started it straight out of undergrad. I actually got my degree in psychology of all things, so no formal background or PhD, but it just goes to show you that you can actually start a company in a field that you don't necessarily have a ton of expertise in. So happy to talk more about that.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. And Kelvin, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Kelvin Liu. I'm the founder and CEO of Genomics. We develop a lot of sample prep tools for long read sequencing. Like we have a lot of customers that do Oxford Nanopore, PacBio, Genomics, optical mapping. Our company is a spinoff out of Hopkins. That's where I did my PhD. Prior to doing my PhD, I actually worked for a bunch of startups between undergrad and my PhD. So I worked for a bunch of startups in San Diego, LA, and the Bay Area.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Kelvin, let's stay with you for a second based on your background. And I love how everybody has such different backgrounds. It's really interesting. So Kelvin, what would you say is the difference between working at a company versus now running your own company?
I think the biggest decision is you get to make all the decisions, right? So I think when you're a grunt, so I was a grunt at those 3 earlier startups, and you kind of it's kind of like when you're a kid and you assume your parents know all the answers. You think mom and dad know everything, so you think that your CEO and your the VCs know everything. You can just trust in them, and then you do your job, which is develop the technology. Then when you're running a parent, it's much like being a parent. Now when you're in charge of the ship, you have to make a lot of those decisions, and then now you have all your employees that you feel really personally responsible for. So every time I make a decision, I'm always thinking, okay, what's the next 6 months going to look like? What's the next year going to look like? What's COVID going to look like? How's this going to affect my employees? Now, like every decision is, there's a lot more gray hair, let's say, but it's also a lot of fun.
Okay, sounds good. And how important, so for this is to anybody who kind of started in industry, not as a CEO and now as a CEO, how important do you think it is for people to kind of cut their teeth in industry before becoming a CEO? Any ideas about that? Or maybe to Adina, who just started out as a CEO, maybe that's the flip side of the question. Maybe it's not important at all. What would you say, Adina?
I mean, I think that as long as you're willing to actually go and learn, it's fine, right? I mean, if you look at a lot of your university education, much of that is learning how you learn, right? And so as long as you're willing to continue to ask questions and get mentorship, you can learn how to do anything, right? And I don't know that it matters as much if you're in industry or not before you do. I think that it is important to have partners, though, that have deep expertise. So I have co-founders, right, that have been in industry. So I think that you don't have to personally have the experience, but having people that have been there, I think does make a difference.
I thought my experience at my first 3 startups was pretty useful for a couple of reasons. I think the first reason was it made me less tentative, because I'd been through the process 3 times, with startups that had largely failed. So I knew what was involved in the process. And then as part of the learning experience, you can keep your eyes open and kind of pick and choose, I like what they did. I don't like what they did. I'm definitely gonna do that. I'm gonna avoid that. So kind of helps you hone your own game a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, let's go to you. What skills have you learned along the way that you did not have before you started your own company that you think are really important for people to know?
I mean, that's a great question. I think the most obvious one is sort of management and working with a larger team. I mean, coming out of academics, it's sort of the one person fighting force all the way through, and getting out of that environment and landing in an environment that you have a team that's all working towards a common goal, and then having to manage reports or people that report into you was a bit of a sort of an eye-opening experience for me. So I think that's the most obvious example.
Okay. Is there anything that you thought a skill you thought that you really would lean on a lot that actually you haven't used at all, or it's become far less important?
I guess for me, again, I came out of academics very, very naive. And so the work there was so focused on publication and things like that. And so, that was life and death as an academic. And you realize that, obviously there are aspects of that skill, writing and communicating data, communicating information, that are super important. But that sort of the true nature of the game of the publication was something that I really haven't had to touch again since I left academics.
Okay, that's interesting. So I'm sure that there are a lot of people in the audience who have great ideas, who are interested in starting their own companies. And so Trey, what would you say, what should they do first? What's a great way to just get started?
Yeah, no, a good question, and I think maybe the first question I would ask yourself is, why do you think it's a great idea? What defines it as a great idea? Because I think, first of all, just sort of really defining the idea. Why do you think it's great? And then sort of validating that. And a great way to do that is to engage with other researchers or potential customers that may be interested in that idea, and continue to validate the concepts, to get into the details around what value that might bring, what pain points you may be trying to address with that, and sort of taking it from sort of that ideation phase to bringing and exposing it to sort of the outside world and getting inputs into that, I think could be really valuable, and looking for other people that that you trust and could provide support into just generally taking ideas and turning them into products, or turning them into companies, and leaning on other people that may have had some experience with that to also validate the idea.
Yeah, so actually that's a great point. I've been told before that there's a big difference between a good or great idea, a good or great product, and a successful company. So Trey, in your experience, what have you found? Is the maybe the key to all of those, or like where does one of those fall flat? What should people be thinking about?
Yeah, I know. I think a couple things come to mind. I think size of the market opportunity is and sometimes that information is available, and most of the time it's not. But just getting a general sense, I think what can differentiate a good product idea from a company is something as simple as just what is the market, what's the potential market opportunity, and do I understand that? How do I define that? And then that could help at least inform scale with respect to product versus company. The other important piece to that is does this product exist on its own, or does it need to be integrated into a larger portfolio or workflow, or what's necessary to really extract the value from the product? Is it standalone, or is it part of a larger sort of offering? And then sort of separate to that very specific question on product versus company is just your own individual appetite for building a product versus a company. And there's a lot of other areas to learn and to focus, as Adina and others had referenced earlier, that are required to build an actual company from a product. And so you first need to determine those first few steps, and then ask yourself the question, are you interested in building a company? Because it tends to require a lot more than the product and the science focus to that. And then again, that gets back to building the right team, the right founding team, and then the additional complementary competencies that are necessary to support that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So taking all of that into account, Adina, let me ask you, I mean, how did you, and so there are spaces in genomics that are so crowded, how did you figure out what niche you wanted to fit into with your company?
Yeah, I would say that there's a fair amount of trial and error, right? And also, one of the things that's interesting, I think, specifically about the genomics field is that it moves so quickly. I mean, like back when we started the company, it was $100,000 just worth of straight chemistry to sequence one person's whole human genome, right? And so the business that you would build in that environment is very different than the business you would build now, right? So back then, we were very much on the forward-looking cutting edge of how do you even analyze one person's genome, and that was really hard. And now we are focused on population analysis. How do you analyze large portions of populations and compare all of those people to figure out which genetic variations are important to various diseases? So there's a fair amount of having to surf the wave, if you will, of the industry to ensure that the company continues to remain relevant over time.
Absolutely. That's a good point.
Did you get all of that? It looks like it broke up a little bit.
Just a little bit, but no, it came through.
Okay,
Trey, yeah, building off of that point, I mean, what is a big difference that you've seen between your first company, which was, what was it, like 10 years ago, you said? And today?
Yeah, 2006, so almost 15 years ago.
Okay, I mean, what are the big differences that you see between then and now?
Yeah, I think since that time period, and we were fortunate to be part of the. I think every 20 or 30 years in molecular biology, there's something real foundational and fundamental disruption, and to be part of sort of the next gen sequencing, sort of disruption that took place over the last 10, 15 years has really only expanded, I think, the opportunity set with respect to both entrepreneurs, but also just the magnitude and the scale of the market opportunities. And we look at follow a lot of both our friends that have started companies in the space, and follow a lot of companies, and you see companies go from idea to multi-billion-dollar publicly traded companies, and time spans now that 15 years ago were just not thought to be possible. And I think the other consequence of that is and they're very interrelated, obviously, is attraction of capital, and the scale of the market now is attracting a lot more capital, which is allowing sort of that idea to multi-billion-dollar company sort of path to happen in an accelerated way. And I think for me personally, just witnessing that over the last decade, and really feel that we're probably still in the early innings of how this might look in the next 10 to 20 years is pretty exciting.
Okay, great. I want to make sure that we have some time for questions from the audience. So let me take a couple, and then we can always go back to our conversation. So how about this question? What kind of research did you do to realize that your idea was worthy of setting up a startup? Did you get help from experts in your field without thinking that they would steal your ideas? Or how do you go about with the IPR of your ideas? How about Brian? Sorry, I should have called on you before I read the question, but did you get all of that? That was a couple questions actually.
I did, yeah,
Okay,
and
great.
it's a very good question, and I guess in this particular case, my answer might not be that satisfying because I think, you know, I had the opportunity of having some experience, and I should elaborate on what Watchmaker does. So we develop sort of custom enzymes for genomics workflows and genomics workflows themselves, and so from my past experience, we had sort of found the bottleneck in a lot of the chemistries that are required for genomics tools was the enzymes. And so that was just sort of direct observation time and time again when we were sort of dissecting some of the tools that we were working with, that there were shortcomings with a lot of the enzymes. So that was just that the idea that Trey, myself, and our third co-founder kind of came to start the company with. We had all sort of landed and converged on the same kind of I guess, observation. So I don't know if that's a satisfying answer for the person asking the question in this particular case.
I think so. And, you know, going back to what Trey was saying earlier, you know, I did my PhD, I finished in 2008, and starting a company, at least where I was not really a thing. And it seems like now there's so many more companies spinning out of universities and institutions and and even specific labs. So Kelvin, can you tell me a little bit about how important it was for you to be in a place that was spinning out companies or not? And if a person is in a place where that's not part of the culture, you know, what are some words of advice that you might give them?
Sure. So I think, you know, it's so when I worked for startups first, those were in kind of San Diego and the Bay Area. So, you know, so there's a lot of startup culture there, you know, from way back. But when I came to Hopkins, you know, that culture didn't exist. You know, there weren't many startups. So when we actually spun out from Hopkins in 2012, we were that was when Hopkins actually set up the first tech incubator. And the space we were in was really, really modest. And we were in the basement of this other building. It was pretty dingy, but it was, you know, it's functional space. So, you know, I think in the 5 years since then, Hopkins has really invested a lot more into building, you know, a much bigger infrastructure. And then now there are tens, if not hundreds, of companies that are spinning out of Hopkins in very pretty shiny incubators. So I think, you know, having that ecosystem definitely makes it a lot more reassuring, a lot easier. You know, because there's a lot of soft favors that you can get from the company institutes and the support system. You know, you can get cheap lab space, you know, you can get tech transfer support. And those are really, you know, valuable things when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of capital.
Adina, let me ask you, so if you're not in a place that's, you know, spinning out a lot of new companies, or you're not even, you know, you're not in a PhD program for science, what advice would you give to people who are starting out to find support or help?
Yeah, so find the other people that are like you, because there's other crazy people that are crazy enough to start companies. And we definitely are a special breed, and finding other people like us really makes a difference. Because, you know, I remember in the very early days, you know, starting a company can be very stressful. And I remember having some conversations with my friends in the very early days where they were like, gosh, you just seem so stressed out. Like, you know, I have this recruiter friend at Amazon, maybe they could like help you find a regular gig. And that is not helpful, right? And so you got to find the people that are like you. And so they do exist for sure within the Seattle area. But if they don't exist in your area, you can go to them. So there's accelerators that exist very much so in the Bay Area and Boston. And so if this is something you're really committed to and you want to be in an environment where it's really supportive, you can totally move to that.
And Adina, back to you. What would you say has been one of the biggest challenges that you've faced during your time as CEO?
Biggest challenges? I mean, there are many challenges. I would say one of the challenges that I would say I found the most surprising was around running into biases around like gender. You know, I would say that I definitely thought that that was something that my mother's generation dealt with and was not going to be something that I ran into. And I think that that was the most surprising. I wouldn't say it was the biggest challenge by any means, but there's ways to train and deal with that. And so for any of the female founders out there that are thinking about starting companies, what I would say is the biggest difference is how venture capitalists will ask questions. Instead of asking about opportunity, they'll ask about risk. And so the biggest thing you can do is to retrain yourself to rephrase the questions they're asking into opportunity-based questions and answer that question. And that will actually do a huge amount in terms of correcting for that bias.
Okay, great, thanks. And we have to talk about the, what's going on today. I mean, we can't not talk about COVID-19. So, Brian, how has COVID-19 made an impact on your company? How much has it affected your company specifically? But really, what do you think is going to happen maybe in the next year? And then do you think that it will have an impact on biotech even longer term than that?
That's a great question. I mean, for us, the very direct answer is, I mean, we're operating like I think many people that are working, many people on the screen probably are, and then other of the attendees are working. I mean, we're down to about 50 to 60% capacity in the lab, and I think we've been very creative with the way that we've dealt with it. And in terms of productivity, I think we've done quite well. People can get a lot done, even if it requires, even people that do mostly hands-on work are able to sort of keep up with a lot of the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis, off-site and things like that. So that's been good. From a business perspective, I mean, one of the things that we're seeing, our business operates primarily by selling products to other businesses in sort of an OEM kind of fashion. And, there's been a lot of disruptions for other customers. And so you see, our customer base, you can see that there's sort of changes of strategy, changes of their focus and things like that, which has been, a challenge for us. But, to answer your question on the broader biotech scene, I mean, I think in many ways, there's probably growing investment in biotech as a result of this, because people are looking for opportunities to see this as an opportunity in some ways. And I think that's probably maybe the positive that comes out of it.
Yeah, I was just at this synthetic biology conference, and they just raised more money in the last 6 months than, I think ever. Okay, question from the audience. So how are you able to develop and market your company's product service as worthy enough for a customer to purchase instead of seeking a collaborator, another company, or take the time to develop it themselves, etc.? Would anybody like to answer that, or I can just, sorry.
I can jump in.
No,
I mean, we do all of the above. I think we don't try, like Ivan said earlier in his last talk, we don't try too hard to sell. Obviously, we sell products, but we really try to build long-term relationships with our customers. Sometimes, and those don't always start up as customers. A lot of times they'll start out as collaborations, with labs down the hall, with introductions from one person to, next. So I think we're pretty open to just talking to anybody and trying to help anybody with sample prep. And then that usually just builds kind of organically upon itself into customers, and also sometimes new products even.
That goes back to the previous panel, right? And they were saying build relationships.
Yeah, I would reiterate, what was said there. I think sort of multi-pronged approach when you've got proof of concept or prototype, products that you can be engaged with, both from a co-development or collaborative perspective, all the way through to, more of a customer-centric relationship. But you learn from all of those, and I think the most important sort of take home from that is to be very externally focused and learn from, your customer base, from your collaborators, because as Kelvin had said, you get feedback on the product and the product performance. You also get feedback on new product features and new product ideas entirely. And that's absolutely been the case in my experience, where, we like to take credit for a lot of the ideas that we'd come up with over the years. And in reality, it's mostly been our customers. We just, find ways of commercializing and scaling a lot of those ideas.
Okay, terrific. Well, that brings us to the end of our time and our discussion. I want to again thank all of the panelists for sharing their amazing insight, and I want to thank all of you for joining us. and the program will continue in just a moment, so stay tuned.
Thank you.
Right.
Great. Thank you everyone on that panel. That was excellent. We're going to take a brief, probably 2-minute break so that everyone can get up and stretch, and then we'll dive into our final panel. So we will see you in like 2 minutes. All right, we are going to now start our next panel, which I will be moderating. And so if Amy and Ben, if you're able to join me, then we can get started. Hi, Ben.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Amy.
Yes, we can. Let me make sure we are on gallery view. There we go. Great, hello. Nice to see you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today for this event. So as I already mentioned earlier, I'll reintroduce myself. I'm Kayla, I'm this Chief Operating Officer at Phase. And to just start us off, Ben and Amy, can you each introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and also a little bit about the firm that you work for? And Ben, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm excited to chat about this. I'm an associate at Hatteras Venture Partners. We're an early stage venture firm based in Durham, North Carolina. We invest across all aspects of healthcare. So that includes biopharma, med tech, diagnostics, healthcare IT, and tools. We've been around since 2000. So as early stage investors, a lot of that is spinning startups out of academia. Since we're in the research triangle, work with Duke and UNC, but have worked with universities primarily across the East Coast, make investments throughout the US. Seed and Series A is really our sweet spot. We're science-minded first. I'm a research scientist by training. I did a PhD in cell biology, followed that up with a postdoc in genomics, looking at transcriptional regulation of non-coding regions. So really excited about this conversation today. Thanks.
My name is Amy Du. So I'm with Hemi Ventures based out of San Francisco. We invest in, well, I think not only healthcare, but also other industry as well, including enterprise AI and mobility. So I would say probably healthcare is about 1/3 of our portfolio right now. So we started in 2016, focused on seed and also Series A as well, mostly seed. And then so far we have invested in 32 companies. out of which I think more than a third are in the healthcare and biotech space. And then among those, I believe more than half are kind of related with genomics or some sort of genomics technology there. So I myself am not, so I founded Honey Ventures in 2016. We have partners who focus more on the different kind of industry, but I do not really have a kind of healthcare by training backgrounds and more of a software background. So I think when I talk to the entrepreneurs from the healthcare side, I think I probably always take another view. So we invest in Face actually a year ago, and then have been talking to Evan quite actually after that, learned a lot. So very happy to be here today to share my insights.
Great, and thank you for your investment. So let's just, you both mentioned the diversity of the portfolios. You're both investing in similar stages, but since we are talking genomics, when you consider your investment portfolio, how do you rate a genomics startup company based on the current trends? Is it a nice to have? Is it a must have? And do you see that changing in the near future? And Amy, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just mentioned, I was actually counting a little bit because I think we have probably so many right now. I cannot really remember everything, but I do believe we have more than half a startup that are related to genomics. So I would say it's definitely a must to have for probably early stage healthcare venture capital. The only thing is I would probably see we probably focus more on what the startup's doing, whether that is nice to have or that is must to have. So I have seen a lot of startups coming to us say, hey, we have this great technology and then we can help people or help this industry become better. Usually when I hear that, there's always a question mark or some sort of red flag, just say how better? Is it 2x better, or it is 20x better, or it's 200x better, right? So that makes a huge difference. So I would say, I think genomics is definitely an area where there are a lot of innovation right now. But the problem itself could be a must to have or could be a nice to have. So really depending on the founders to figure out whether that is an essential problem to solve or whether that's just sort of nice to have, like a vitamin-ish kind of problem to solve. I think for venture, well, for VCs like us, we probably prefer something more essential on that side.
Great, and Ben?
Yeah, so our perspective would be somewhere along the lines of a must consider. And that's kind of saying nothing is necessarily a must to have in enforcing an investment across our portfolio, but genomics and tools in general are definitely an area of interest right now. And that's been a big shift in say the past 3 to 4 years, where tools was sort of it would go by the wayside, not necessarily somewhere where we were actively deploying capital. And now it's somewhere where we're going to learn about the technologies. This is revolutionary. That's why we're having the conversation today. So I think it's definitely an area of interest. I think there are a few things that really highlight that. I mean, if you just look at public market subsectors in healthcare last year, that seems like a lifetime ago now, but tools and diagnostics were the top performing subsector, which, I mean, that's game changing and brings this into the light even more. So that's great. I think the other aspect is that there is a growing environment of limited partners who are interested in tools. So where we get our money from limited partners that are investing in funds, and they want to see exposure to tools, in genomics in particular. So that's growing, and there's just a growing set of investors that are focusing on the space. So it's definitely something that we're actively paying attention to.
Great. So on that same kind of thread, you mentioned just the huge growth that we've seen in genomics in the last decade, but also specifically the last couple of years. So what breakthroughs or new developments are you most excited for, today in the future, and things that you're seeing, kind of starting to bubble up? Go ahead, Ben. Sorry, I should have directed that to you from the beginning.
Sure. So, I think specific technologies, there's a tremendous amount happening here. I think right now, one of the biggest things that's helping to shape energy in genomic investments is single cell. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people here. I think part of the ways that we think about it and getting exposure to that in our portfolio comes from a lot of different angles. I think one of the things that's interesting right now is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a direct tools type company to get exposure to single cell. Being able to get new data to drive even a therapeutics company that can focus on a single cell type is a really interesting proposition right now. So there are a lot of opportunities there. So that's one thing that's interesting. I think there are also aspects of informatics that are changing right now. Having new algorithms that can help make things cheaper is a possibility that's exciting. New methods for alignment and mappability, seen a lot of transformational ideas there. So I think it's really the full gamut that we're paying attention to. Those are a couple of them.
Great.
Yeah, I think for breakthrough, it's hard to predict it. Otherwise, I think, I wouldn't
we
have
would
to
be doing it.
already like moved to island or something. But I think for us, the focus is really just on the team. I think the team's background, what they have been working on before, how much expertise they have. So usually, I think especially on the healthcare side, what we found is expertise of the whole team matters so much, whether it's from the academic side where we have invested in a lot of spin-off from different universities or academic labs, and also together with, say, business expertise where some of the team members have founded companies before or have serial kind of startup experience before. I think those kind of combination of the team kind of expertise are really something that can become kind of a ground for a breakthrough ish kind of startup. So I think a lot of times what we found is, well, from our investment is, if the team is just good at one thing, right, particularly just one thing, it's actually really difficult for them to scale because, it just means, they like other type of knowledge, whether it comes to financing or fundraising or business development or partnership discussion, etc. So I would say for us, when we look at, our investment, we want to have a good team first, and then so that they will figure out what will be the breakthrough innovation there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Juliana in the previous panel alluded to this too, is that distinction between having a good product and a good company. You could have a really good product, but not be able to have a great company. So
I feel like the last panel talks more about, VCs.
They made our job easy.
You're touching all the point that, I thought we'll be talking about in this panel.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Amy, you alluded to looking for the team as a big indicator of where you'll invest. And so kind of the flip side of that is, what's the biggest mistakes you see when entrepreneurs come to pitch or even just have a conversation, even if it's not a, legit pitch? What's a consistent or, big no-no that you see that you would like to advise against?
Well, I wouldn't say against, because I think every company is different, right? So I wouldn't be, 100%, kind of like who is right, who's wrong. Actually, I'm doing a lot of coaching for our portfolio right now in terms of for the next round pitching. And so I've been spending a lot of time with our CEOs in terms of how to do the pitch for the next round investors. And then actually last week I just did one. One thing that I keep saying during that 1 hour session is just basically saying, don't only think about yourself. Don't only think about your startup. So most of the time I think startups go to pitch their ideas. It's like, hey, we're blah, blah, blah. We're focusing on this. It's great. You have to invest. And then, so that's really how the first pitch goes. But I actually think it doesn't really differentiate that much, because think about every, startups are probably doing the same. And then for us, I think the most important thing is whether it fits into investment criteria. And I think one of the biggest mistake is when people do the pitch, they don't really know who is on the other side, right? So every VC is different. Like Ben's firm is probably very different from ours. Like, you know, Ben has probably invested in company that's also different from ours. So every VC is different. So don't use one pitch to try to fit everyone, and it certainly wouldn't work. For example, I think, you know, Ben just mentioned they wouldn't invest in, or they would, you know, want to invest in tool last year. So I think that could be a, you know, nice approach if you know the VC's interest in that area. Or for example, for us, we don't really invest in pure therapeutics companies. So if I have, you know, a startup coming to me and then, you know, doing the pitch, I think in the first 5 minutes, it's just, you know, I just know they don't know us really well. So I think customize sort of the pitch for different VCs are very important, but sometimes it's difficult because it just takes time to work, right? If you're going to do 20 pitches, so like you have to do 20 research. But hey, this is startup life. You have seen like the 3-4, you know, startup CEOs before this panel. I mean, that's the hard work. But I would just really say customize the pitch and really learn about who's on the other side can really save everyone's time.
Great, that's awesome feedback. I like on a much smaller scale, I sit on an angel investment committee in Seattle, and we find that quite often where people come in with highly technical, very, very technical pitches, and this group of angels is not equipped to take that on. So I think I've experienced that on a much smaller scale. Ben, do you have anything to add to that? Other things that you would advise, you know, entrepreneurs to not do in a pitch or to do?
Yeah, so I would echo that comment of know who you're talking to and the backgrounds. That's really important. I think one other point that's already been made to some degree is, you know, as VCs, we're not funding science projects. So really thinking through what the business model looks like and being able to pitch that and sort of what the end goal is here is important to get across. And so you're not just getting into the weeds of the technical aspect of it. So I think the one way to frame this is to come across what is the problem, what is the solution, and I think most importantly, what are the milestones that you need to get there. That's one thing that we don't always see is sort of, you know, what in a time-based manner, what are the milestones that you can get to, and that's what we can actually finance is what can you get to in a certain amount of time, and that we could see if we put in a certain amount of money, what can we expect to see at that given time. And it gives us a way to wrap our minds around what that risk profile looks like at any given point. I think someone brought that up in the last panel, but that's very much what the calculus is in our head. So I think, you know, simplifying it in that way. And one other point that I'll make is that investors have a very short attention span. And sort of that first 5 minutes is critical. So, you know, getting to what the product is sooner rather than later is usually a good idea.
Great. So I'm going to jump. We have some really good questions that I'm going to go through, and I think some of them will be shorter to answer than others. So for the first one, the person asking, the naive perspective is that there are plenty of VC investors in the US. What is your appetite for overseas startups, or is it just dependent on the idea? Either can take this.
Because
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Pretty straightforward. So we're restricted by our LP agreement to only invest in the US. So we look for technologies in the US only, and that's our geographic restriction.
Is that the same for you, Amy?
Yeah, so most of our portfolios are based in US. We invested in a couple out of Canada. We were looking at a couple in Europe. Actually, I was just in Europe early this year. Yeah. In London and Lisbon, actually, to look at quite a few biotech startups here. I mean, it's amazing. I think, you know, they're doing, you know, interesting stuff. There are actually quite a few, quite a big startup scene there. For us, the problem is, which I, you know, always share with the overseas startup is, you know, we would probably just prefer to have a local partner there, whether it's in-house of ours or is a venture partner of ours to help can oversee the startups here. So VC is actually very local. I think most people do not understand this. Like, you know, VC is a very risky business. So basically you're writing a check to a company and then just hopefully they will be able to grow. But hey, there's a lot of risks there. There's a lot of uncertainty. So we would prefer to be able to at least sort of, reach out to that startups, just pick up the phone, call someone, or just meet the startups, I think, from time to time locally. So that's why I think for me, for example, we're based in San Francisco. So most of our investment, well, I think, so majority of our investment are kind of on the West Coast where we know, who they are, or, through kind of trustworthy introductions on East Coast, Midwest. So we have partners there that we can work with. If it's too remote and where we do not really have any people on the ground, it's just, very, very difficult unless we know that team really well. So if you are overseas startup, really look for your connections, right? Whether it's someone through your team members in US, or whether it's someone you worked with before. I think that's probably more legit than just like cold emailing a VC. I think the chance will be higher there.
Great. So kind of to the same question of geography, you're obviously both representing, good, solid research areas that are, rolling out a lot of technologies from universities and, are very startup heavy between SF and Research Triangle. Are there any other, distinctions between how you would invest, how maybe Ben, you would invest versus Amy, just by the coastal differences? Or is that more of mythology that, you just kind of hear around? Whoever wants to take that, yeah.
So style-wise, there are some differences, East Coast versus West Coast. I think it's probably not as big of a difference as some people play it up to be. I think as I mentioned earlier, we invest throughout the US. I think Amy's points are excellent about we're going to most typically invest in our region. I would just add to that, we're most likely to lead a deal that's in our region. That's going to be the deal where we have the relationship, we're boots on the ground, getting to know, these are long-term relationships, and working with that team, helping to build that team when there's inevitably some problem that's going to go wrong. And if it's going to be a West Coast deal, hopefully there's an investor on the West Coast that's there, that knows that team more personally, and we'd be less likely to actually be the ones to craft that term sheet. In terms of the actual deal structure, I think when you get to that point, it's probably an important aspect. Some terms are more favorable on the East Coast than they are on the West Coast, but those are nuances largely. But it's a reason to have good counsel, and it's a good reason to pay them.
So things to take away: good team, good counsel.
Yeah,
Amy.
I completely agree. And I think, definitely focusing on the region. So we see a lot of West Coast VCs probably wouldn't really travel to other areas because there's already plenty of, potential investment here. And I even have a co-investor I work with, based out of Austin, just saying we don't invest in deals in California. So very bluntly. But I think, besides the team, besides the council, I think the style is probably more differentiated after the investment, I would say. So I think, before the investment, every firm has its own sort of, style is very, I don't think it's that different because we're all, in the same stage, looking at different things, and terms wise, it's kind of standard. I don't think it will differentiate too much. But I do think what I found in our, most of our investment is there's a different style when it comes to, say, board or board management, or say, the post portfolio kind of services. For example, some of the portfolio where I sit on the board, where we have the other board members from, Midwest, I think they're more serious when it comes to a board meeting. So challenge the CEO all the time, say, hey, why you don't have that number, and do that for me, etc. And I think I would probably say for us, we're more like early stage and then more used to kind of uncertainty there. We're probably more on the side of support the CEO. We would say we wouldn't want you to have a perfect slice, right? We want you to, just figure out the path and then, do this, do that. And if you need introduction, let us know. We can introduce you to this and that. So I think the post-investment style is probably different. So one thing I would suggest is if you're talking serious to a VC, and then probably do some background check about that VC you work with, whether it's with some of their other portfolios so they can introduce them, or you can just ping them to say, what they look like after the investment. I think a lot of times people are, startups so eager for money, so they forget actually after investment, you have to live with VC for at least, 5-6 years, if not more. So you better, do your own kind of homework to make sure this is not something that you do not want to see in the future, right? So it's someone, you would like to work with and they can be helpful to the company. And I think that background check is important for the startups to do actually to the VCs.
Great. Yeah, so I think we'll do one more question before we wrap. And I think we've hit on a couple of these points already, but so when somebody's considering to start a company, they should consider their lawyer, build an appropriate team, really flesh out their kind of product first company, and why is this important? Any other tips that you would specifically offer somebody who's still in academia that is considering making the leap into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I like that question because we work with a lot of academia even before I think the incorporation of their startups. So maybe a year or 2 years, so very early. I think one thing that I would say is important when people want to kind of change their hat from academia to entrepreneur is one is just don't try to be a perfectionist. 80% is enough in the startup world. So nothing could be, I think this is very different from the academia thinking where, you have the paper, you have the number, everything has to be perfect. And I think that's awesome. The world needs that. But when it comes to startups, I think it's more about the pace, the speed, and then solve different problems quickly. Rather than say, I want to make this perfect, so I'm going to work on this for 5 years. Like, look, our fund is only like 10 years. So our investment period is only 5 years. So sorry, then, this is not really for us because our obligation is different. So I think that kind of just 80% is enough. It's important mindset wise. And then another one, I think, is just probably just be more comfortable with uncertainty. I think a lot of times when academia start a company, they're not some of them may not be very comfortable with uncertainty, right? There's uncertainty in, hiring or partnership or, fundraising, etc. Just be comfortable with that. I think it's that's the path you have to figure out. And then, so there's not a clear path there, but you're the ones who need to figure that out. So that too is probably my advice there.
That's great. We put on all our job descriptions of comfort with ambiguity. So
that's a great trigger.
So not only are we at the executive level comfortable with it, but we also hire for it. So exactly. Ben, do you have anything else to add?
So I would say don't be scared. It's okay to come to the dark side. So I think to add to Amy's comments, I think one thing is self-awareness is really important. So know what you know and know what you don't know. We've talked about team here, and I think I'll just reiterate that point in that no one will know the technical side better than you do coming from academia, but there's great strength in having industry experience and people who can help you think through what's the best product market fit and aspects like that. And being able to bolster your team is a really great way to help build a successful company. So, I think just being truthful with yourself is a great way to make the leap into entrepreneurship. It's definitely drinking from the fire hose, and there are going to be mistakes along the way. But I would mainly just say, don't be scared.
Great. I think that's a perfect note to end on. There's quite a few really good questions that didn't get answered in the Q&A. And I do just want to throw out, everyone who's an attendee does have my personal email, and I would be happy to help answer some of these questions since we didn't get to them. So by all means, that is an appropriate outreach. But to that point, Ben and Amy, thank you so much for participating on this panel. I really enjoyed talking with you and hope to meet you in person someday.
For sure.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much. And at this point, I'm going to call back Ivan to do another giveaway, and then we will wrap up the afternoon. So thank you guys. And Ivan, please turn your camera back on.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, hello. Welcome back to the reward giving part of the program. So yes, thank you everybody. We had an amazing group of speakers. I'm not even gonna say it because it's kind of obvious. Thank you so much to our speakers, and thank you so much to the sponsors. As you know, this whole thing that we're hosting is really about trying to foster a stronger genomics community. It started out here in the Seattle area, but COVID made us go virtual, but that means we can go global. And so we actually I think we had some people registered from 15 different countries last we checked. So it's just kind of amazing. I hope you guys are out there and are getting some value out of this. And, so for me, just the way to sort of conclude this, when we think about how can you foster a healthy genomics community wherever you are, there are a million different things you can do. Just 3 things to highlight. So first of all, one way that one can take action is through jobs, right? Everybody wants to work. Everybody wants to sort of, especially in today's crazy environment, and everyone's looking for jobs. Startups like ours are always trying to find good candidates. Recruiting is just something that's on our mind all the time. So what we've done is we've created a Genome Startup Day LinkedIn page and a GSD social channel on Twitter to try to connect people. And like Kayla said, we will take your emails to answer questions. Feel free to reach out to us either through those groups or directly. The second thing to think about is really, and I always harp on this, is seek opportunities to learn, whether it's an event like this or something similar. There's probably stuff in your town, there's incubators. If you're curious, don't sort of sit at home and expect it'll magically come to you. Go out there and try to really connect with people, and go out there. Of course, these days might mean virtual, but set up calls, find people, like Adina said, find people who are like you, who are interested in similar things, who have done things this way, and just talk to them. Like, nobody's going to say no if you ask them for a 15-minute call just to ask them some questions, bounce some ideas. We're all interested in this and we all want to help. And then, of course, the next step of that is direct experience, actually getting involved in something like this. So for instance, we're planning to have one of our subsequent Genome Startup Day events to be student run. We had a really good, we work with student groups here at University of Washington up in Seattle, and I'm sure there are many others, but really that's kind of where a lot of innovation happens, is in the early stages, and we sort of want to kind of nurture that. And so if you're in that situation, really try to think of how can I get involved, maybe student groups, or maybe just directly talking to folks in startups. And so just, community is hard to build. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. But like what you've heard from pretty much every speaker today, we've been seeing tremendous traction in the genomics space, and even something like this that we just kind of cooked up in our own. Just the success of these kind of events shows you how much excitement, how much opportunity there is, how cool it is these days to be in sort of the biotech and the genomics space. And so please follow us on the social channels, on LinkedIn, etc. And without further ado, I'm just going to start looking at people and giving stuff away. So thank you guys for sitting through this, and your reward is coming. So we are going to give you some Seattle-based products. The first such thing, the first prize for sticking through this, will be this exclusive fall themed item. On my screen, it shows up backwards. If you're not part of the pumpkin latte cult, this is your chance. The lucky winner of this highly exclusive item that you can't get anywhere is Amal Katrib. Would you please, Amal, if you're around, would you please say something in the chat or raise your hand?
Yeah, I see it. We will reach out to you.
All right. Okay.
Winner.
You passed the test. Now, the next thing we're going to do is a little bit juicier. The lucky winner will be getting not 1, not 2, but 5 chocolate bars from Seattle's local favorite, Theo's Chocolate. These are amazing. We were selling them last year as for Cub Scouts. These are super popular. And the winner of this delicious chocolate pack is Diane Huang, Hoang. Diane, are you in our audience? Because you got some chocolate.
Don't think so.
Do you see Diane?
No,
Ooh.
I do not. Just the creepy voice in the background.
Just my creepy voice in the background?
No, just me being a creepy voice in the background. Wait, let me.
All right, hook me up with roll those dice again.
All right, got it.
All right, how about Gerardo Ramirez? Are you in our audience?
Yeah, awesome.
All
okay.
right, you win. Cool, congratulations. And then of course, the piece de resistance. We're gonna be doing the socks again. DNA socks going to Kristen Musar. Are you in our audience?
Neat.
Come on, Kristen.
I see you there.
Life-changing experience. All right, Kristen is going to get her life changed by these socks. All right, guys, congratulations. Thanks everyone else for coming. Keep in touch, follow us on Twitter, all that stuff. And
I will reach out for prizes.
Yep, and we'll see you next time. Unless Kayla.
Thank you, everyone.
Conclusions.
The LinkedIn group is in the chat if you would like to join, and follow our socials, which you can find at genomestartupday.com. So we appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and I will reach out to prize winners. Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.